decision-making processes. To facilitate this process, Husson University, home to the largest college of business in the state of Maine, is pleased to present this Distinguished Business Speaker Series. The series, launched in conjunction with the opening of Husson's new College of Business building, Harold Alfont Hall, includes dynamic speakers from a variety of disciplines ranging from banking, government and security, to management, marketing, and more. Its main objective is to educate students, alumni, and community members to the challenges facing businesses and related professions, as well as to inspire those who will become our future business leaders. So today, we are pleased to welcome Steve Smith, the CEO of LL Bean. And I can't think of any more iconic Maine organization than LL Bean. And Steve grew up in Westchester County, New York, and Amherst, Massachusetts. He is a graduate of Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, where he studied art history and physics. Steve began his career in 1992 at J. Walter Thompson in New York City. He moved to Maine in 1997 and rose to become the Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Resort Sports Network. In 2002, he began his retail career at Hannaford Supermarket, and this launched 9 years at the DeHazy Group, where he gained experience in merchandising, commercial planning, marketing, and customer relationship management in the United States and Belgium. Just to make sure you put all of that into perspective of the diversity of backgrounds that our executives have. In 2011, Steve joined Walmart International as a Senior Vice President and General Manager of Sam's Club and Chief Marketing Officer for Walmart China in Shenzhen, China. There, he gained general managerial responsibilities, integrating e-commerce into the core business and improving annual sales growth. A year later, Steve became the Chief Customer Officer of ASDA as a part of Walmart International, a $30 billion plus food, fashion, and general merchandising omni-channel business in the United Kingdom. In 2015, Steve became Chief Marketing and Merchandising Officer at Yihaodian. I'm always pleased when I can pronounce some of these places that people have been. Part of Walmart Global E-commerce, a pure e-commerce business located in Shanghai, China. So on January 4th of 2016, Steve Smith became the fourth president, natural progression from Shanghai, and CEO of LL Bean. Steve now will sit down for a conversation with Marie Hansen, the Dean of the College of Business and the New England School of Communication here at Husson University. Welcome to our campus, Steve.
Thank you, President Clark, and good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate you all being here, whether you're present here or online with us today. It's hard to imagine all these different moves. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but we were having a talk right before this about the history with LL Bean, and I'm just curious if you can give our audience a little bit of a background about LL Bean. I'm sure they know what it is, but just looking at that, and what is it like to be the fourth CEO of such an interesting organization that's been around?
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Marie, and thank you, President, for that introduction. And I haven't heard my bio in detail in a long time, and it's I know it's just funny to listen to now, having been here for 6 years back in Maine. And let me just first start saying thank you for the invitation, for being here, and then I really appreciate our relationship with Husson. It's really
Oh, yes.
fantastic.
Thank you.
And for those who don't know, we do an MBA program for
Yes.
our employees with Husson, and it's really
Getting ready for the first group to
absolutely
graduate.
to graduate.
I
We
know
have
they're
a
very excited.
Future graduate even in the audience here. But anyway, so we love our partnership with you and continue to
Great.
want it to grow. And so really appreciate you inviting us
Thank
here.
you. Yes.
So Bean,
Which is an important part of LL Bean, so I'm glad you answered it that
yes,
way.
absolutely. Founded in 1912 by LL. He is a person, Leon Wood Bean, and the lore can be, everybody knows it or whatever, but he created a boot, the boot that you know now. And we've been around for 109 years. Family owned. LL ran the business until 1966 or 67. When he passed away, he passed the business to his son, who passed away 6 months later. So Leon Gorman became the chairman and CEO in 1967. And we have a really interesting distinction that we sort of have two founders. You don't have the business without LL creating the boot in the beginning of the business. But Leon took LL Bean from $3 million in sales to $1.3 billion in sales, and expanded it to all of the products that you know, the brand that you know, our stakeholder philosophy, the culture of the organization. Leon's fingerprints and footprints are everywhere throughout the organization, and just a spectacular leader. After Leon, Chris McCormick was the third CEO. He was an internal LL Bean person, 33 years at LL Bean, and was the first non-family CEO, but had only worked at LL Bean. And then when I was hired in 2016, I was the first outsider to come in from the outside and to be the fourth CEO in the history of the business. We are now 57 stores in the United States, and physical stores are about 25% of our sales. We are an e-commerce business through and through. 70% of our sales are direct. Most of that is through e-commerce. This year we'll do about $1.7 billion in sales. The remaining, take 70% direct, 25% retail. The remaining 5-ish% is international, and for us that is Canada and Japan. We have a really unique, interesting business in Japan. We've been there for 30 years. We have stores, catalog, e-com, marketplace partnerships there. And yeah, what else can I tell you? That's.
So you were the outsider, you said. Is that where we came up with the tagline, be an outsider, or was that to draw you in?
It was only coincidence there.
Okay.
But we did, one of the things when I was hired, and Sean Gorman, who's my boss, our executive chair, and he's LL's great-grandson, one of the big challenges was we needed to refresh the brand, and I can talk a little bit about just being the CEO of LL Bean and the change agenda that we had to put in place, but we needed to become a much more relevant contemporary brand, and we did a lot of work around brand engineering. That's a lot of my background. And through that process, we came up with our positioning statement, which is made for the shared joy of the outdoors, and then the Be an Outsider campaign launched from that. And that really was to get back to our roots as a business that's driven by being outside. And we had strayed a bit towards, office clothes and things that were sort of more casual and refined, and needed to go back to our outdoor roots.
That's really great. I was hoping that I might be able to use that be an outsider for my husband who's from out of state, but we'll stick to the definition that you've given.
Yeah.
So since the time you came into the company, how do you feel your role has changed? It's been, 6 years now?
Yeah, I'm in my 6th year, yeah. It's been a pretty natural progression. The transition to a new CEO was very well thought out by the board of directors and by the family. The search criteria was, the business knew it needed to change in a lot of ways. There's a lot of deferred maintenance that Bean has, and that was around the brand, it was around our systems, even around our culture, around business process. And so when I came in, I knew that the change agenda, that's why I was there, and that's why I was coming in. And I have deep gratitude and appreciation for the organization because it accepted me as a new leader. And then we've worked really hard to push through a really aggressive change agenda. And most of you will know the outsides of that are things like changing our return policy, changing our free shipping policy, but we also made adjustments with our pension and with all of our technology, with our brand, with the Be an Outsider campaign. And all of that was building a change agenda plan, communicating that to the organization, getting people bought in on the change that was needed, and then getting everybody on board to execute that change agenda. And I'm really pleased to say that the organization has been incredibly open and embracing to that change. And when the pandemic hit, and we can talk about this a little bit later, we were ready for it. We were ready to weather the worst, and then we were ready to capitalize on the opportunities that presented themselves because of all the changes that we had made prior to that.
So that's very opportunistic, actually. And as you know, maybe my next question is really COVID. How has that taken you in different directions, both internally with how you were running things, I guess, particularly with your employees? I know the students earlier had some questions about how that is working, and maybe when it first started in 2020 and then to today, fast forward. How is the pandemic still affecting you?
Yeah, for sure. I will, and I'll go two different avenues on this. I'll talk about 2020 and talk about COVID, but 2020 also needs to be put into context around racial equity, around social justice, around the most disruptive political election we've ever had, loss of leadership all over the place. So leading through 2020 with the pandemic and so many other, it was just incredibly challenging. But if I go to the pandemic, March 13, 2020, I sent an email to the organization saying, bring your laptops home for the weekend. We might be working at home for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Right? Yes. And we all remember the couple of weeks.
Yes. And fast forward to 20 months in, we're still working from home. And on March 16th, we began working from home. And as a retail business, it was extraordinarily scary. And we really looked at how do we shore up the business for survival, not knowing what it was going to look like out in front of us. And interestingly, my wife had read something. She was following, we lived in China before we moved here, and so she stays in touch with a lot of Chinese media. And so she'd actually been following the pandemic since November of 19. And so when March came around, she had read something, and there was this line that she had read, which was, what feels alarmist today may feel inadequate tomorrow. And we actually ended up using that as a business strategy early on, which was, we decided as an executive team, we would make as many difficult decisions as early as possible so that we never would be in a place in the future and say, I wish we had done this, I wish we had done that. And so that was safety for our employees, that was cash preservation, safety for our customers, creating the safest possible environment. And so all of that unfolded early on, and we cut $220 million out of the business in the first couple of months, preserving inventory, cash. And then we clicked into the American psyche from a marketing perspective and from a product perspective. And once we got through survival, and with mask mandates for our employees and social distancing and all the things that we needed to do, sanitation, plexiglass in our stores, one-way traffic in our fulfillment center, we went to a 2-shift operation. So our fulfillment center usually is 1,000 employees working on one shift. We went down to 500 employees on 2 shifts so that we could spread everybody out through the facility, and we did all that. And then we really clicked in to the American psyche, and that was people who were hunkered down at home, working from home. First, they needed to be comfortable, so they were buying slippers and sweats and fleece and flannel. And we were all on Zoom and Teams and stuff. You're only seeing from here up, so whatever you're wearing down below, fine. And so indoor comfort was massive. Then people started to look around their houses, and they got bored of what they had in their houses. So indoor furniture and rugs and stuff like that sold. And then as people started to push out into their backyards, they started to buy outdoor furniture and outdoor games and archery, and then they started to hike and walk their dogs. And so we then shifted. We had this indoor comfort, and then we had this outdoor connection going. And now, if you look at the Outdoor Industry Association data from 20 and 21, millions and millions of new outdoor enthusiasts. And the role that we all played, not just LL Bean, but all outdoor enthusiast companies, was providing really mental and physical health for people in just extraordinary times. And that clicked in for our business, and we ended up 2020. We had our stores closed for 10 weeks. We had traffic down for 50% for the entire year for our stores. E-commerce was booming. And we ended up having our best year in company history in 2020. And then 21 is is even better than that. So trying to capitalize on those lessons. But and there's a million angles we can go in there around COVID, but really proud of the resilience of the company. Our employees have been absolutely spectacular of really taking care of each other. And it's the thing that I talk a lot about empathy as one of my leadership traits, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But the care that our employees have had for each other, for their families, for their communities, recognizing the things that we need to do collectively for the whole during the public health crisis has been really, really rewarding.
And it seems like you were situated well for this, if anybody could have been, by being only 25% in the retail market, and you were so much further into the e-commerce market at this point.
Absolutely. There's always an adage around retail of you need to be where your customers are. And there were a lot of physical retailers who failed during the pandemic as they sprinted to try to build technology for curbside pickup or home delivery. LL Bean, I give the previous generations before me a ton of credit. It was one of the most graceful transitions from an old school economy of a catalog business to e-commerce in 1996. LL Bean's first e-commerce order was taken on November 29, 1996. So we've been doing it for 25 years.
Same age as this building, by the way.
Yeah, so. Awesome. And I love your new building too. So our e-commerce business was really mature and robust. And then stores, we were able to convert stores first to curbside pickup for big items, and then put in new and additional technology to be able to ship from store, pick up in store, and all that. But
it's just amazing, and I appreciate the fact that you are trying to put both your customers' safety as well as your employees' safety first. Just thinking about communication, because we're having a lot of talks about that today. Could I just ask, how did your communication change during the pandemic with your employees and maybe with your customer base too? Yeah,
it's a great question. I will say also, there's one thing we actually said, and we prioritize this, and you will have all felt this if you were customers last year during holidays, you'll feel it again this year, is we overtly have said people before packages. Mm-hmm. So last year during the holiday, we were slower in our delivery, and we'll be slower this year. A couple days, not anything extraordinary. But we absolutely said we're going to prioritize people's health and being able to social distance if we have to slow down our systems. And if people need to wait a couple extra days for packages, we will take that as a sacrifice. For communication, it's been fascinating. And I enjoy communicating. I'm an extrovert. When I came into LL Bean, we put in place town hall meetings and very informal, where we sit on a stage like this on stools, and we don't have a podium, and we, myself and our executive team are fully presented to our organization, and we do all hands and do a lot of written communication. When COVID hit, we've challenged all of our communication. There's one nice thing about we're a Microsoft Teams organization. The democratization of communication through technology has been amazing. When we would have an all-hands meeting or a town hall, we have a facility that holds 300 people. So you can invite 300 people. We could do a rinse and repeat and do 2 of them and have 600. But now we do town hall meetings, everybody's invited. So 4,000, 5,000 employees are able to hear from leadership live in the moment. We have figured out how to manage chat and Q&A and emojis and all that stuff. So we're able to get engagement coming through the screen. And we've increased the volume and the frequency of communication a lot. It's one thing that it's the mental health challenges during COVID have been extraordinary. And one of the things that is really difficult and challenging, and it can literally choke me up on this one, is we actually can't see how people are doing. You can't see if someone is sick or if they're down or if they're depressed, if they're walking by someone's office. And we have had a couple of really tragic moments. We had a couple of people who have passed away who no one knew they were sick. And so we have really tried to make sure that all of our leaders are connecting with all of their employees. When I say town hall, that's sort of all employees, and all hands would be all IT department, all of the marketing department, the merchandising, but try to do it with cameras on, cameras up, so you can see people, you can check in on people, and be really overt about it, and much higher frequency, be very comfortable, in the Teams environment. you click into a meeting and you just go, and you have a topic and you're just on the topic. And then when you're done, you just click leave and you're out. Like, it's very inhuman. And we have been really intentional about, and this may sound a little bit fabricated, but it is what we do. In an agenda, the first 5 minutes, it will say banter. Because it's just talk, like just have your cameras on and just connect, and you'll see people's kids, or you might see someone, they might have lost a lot of weight, and like you can then, animals walking across the screen, across the keyboard or whatever. But being really intentional about trying to find moments where you can have a little bit of a human connection is really, really important.
And that's so true with technology. I know we're just taking you around the building to look at ways that technology can integrate and hopefully keep that human contact that we're having. And thank you for saying that. That is so important.
Yeah.
I do think the connection that you had with some students earlier is also important because they are future leaders. And
Yes,
I think
they
one
are.
of the things, as they're getting on this road to leadership, do you have some advice for them today? What might you tell your younger self, that probably didn't imagine from art history that you would be sitting here talking as the CEO of Hello Bean? I'm just guessing.
Yeah. I should connect. I will connect the dots, Mr. President, on that one, which was so when I was in high school, I liked to build things and I liked to design and draw. And my grandmother at one point asked me, like, what do I want to do? And I was telling her all these things, and she said, you should be an architect. And so I was pretty set on wanting to be an architect. I also played basketball in high school, wanted to play in college. And when I was going to college, I was looking at, do I want to get a Bachelor of Architecture? Mm-hmm. And then I'm on one path. You're not doing anything else other than that if you're specializing your degree. Or do I want to go liberal arts, and which I'm a huge believer in, give myself the basis to then decide, do I want to specialize and get a master's in architecture? So and I went to Dickinson from a liberal arts perspective. Art history gave me the aesthetics, the familiarity with design, the appreciation for history, and then physics would set me up for future structural engineering and comfort with numbers and that kind of stuff. So that was what was in my head, and it was a left brain, right brain.
I was going to say, you're having some sort of fight going on, left brain and right brain there.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of exercising both.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated, I just wanted to start working, and I went into advertising, and I was actually able to tell a good story to my future employer at the moment of being comfortable with numbers and being comfortable with art and design, and architecture and advertising is that combination.
I think they're taking notes. I do see some advertising students in the room.
Yeah. But advice for younger folks, and I have two daughters who are in college right now, a senior and a sophomore, and so I feel like I see your world quite a bit. One of my first things I would say is release a little bit of the pressure that you put on yourselves to be perfect. And I do think that social media.
Were you talking to me or to the students?
Yes, to all of us.
Absolutely. Yes.
Nobody is perfect. And when you look to leaders, all you need to do is try to find people around you who can find the best answers. No one person has the right answer or the best answer. And I think for students, with social media, they see everybody's best self at all times. And I actually think you should go about life just collecting experiences and putting yourself in interesting situations, meeting interesting people, doing interesting things. But you don't need to have a perfect path laid out in front of you. All you need to know is sort of what's the next step that you want to take, and be patient about it and be curious. Ask a lot of questions. And I was talking to the group at lunch, and you can have your intended profession, your intended industry, your intended location, and your intended amount of money you want to make. If you think you're going to get all four of those things, the job in the industry, in the city or town for that amount of money, you're not. So where are you flexible? And what part is flexible? Get a great job, but the industry's not that interesting. Who cares? Get the job and go and learn how to work in an office environment. Or if it's an industry you love, get any job and just start to learn the industry and start to amass experiences and stuff. So I do think just removing a little bit of the attempts to be perfect, I think could be really helpful for this generation. I think they put a lot of pressure on themselves to be overachieving at a young age, and I love that and I appreciate that, and I want this generation to be running this country really, really soon. But I think releasing that pressure would be a good thing.
And I know that we talked a little bit about the journeys you've been on, as President Clark was noting in your background. you've been all over the world, really, and now you're back in Yarmouth, Maine.
Yeah.
Which is your favorite, right?
Yes, it is.
To be in
Yeah,
Maine.
yeah. Yeah, it is.
So can you talk a little bit about those transitions and how that maybe has affected your journey as a leader too, from really that location? Because you said that is one of the things they should be thinking about. So
Yeah, absolutely. And mine actually intertwines with diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. When I went from Maine to Florida, and we were 4 years in Florida, and I was 39 years old, sitting in Florida. I was a vice president or senior vice president, and I had a moment, and I am reflective, and I think about my experiences all the time, and I can talk a little bit about an analogy that I use if you want a little bit later. I just had this reflection of, I'm never going to be a minority. I'm never going to feel what it feels like to not be in the majority. I am a tall, white guy who will be in middle to senior management in the United States, and I'm never really going to experience what it feels like to be different. And so I, at that point, volunteered for an assignment to work on an international project with Delays, which is the parent company of Hannaford, which led to an assignment to go to Belgium and to work in Belgium. And I worked in French and Dutch. I was the only American there. I had no ambient language around me. So if I was active listening, my French was decent. I learned supermarket Dutch. But I had to figure out how to be different in that environment and be an effective leader, an effective marketer, and all that. And I loved it. And I loved the process. And I was a marketer at heart, so I like studying culture and why people do what they do and how they do what they do. And then my daughters, I was starting to watch their lives through watching our international life through their eyes and seeing that we were developing international citizens. And when I talk about amassing experiences and being patient in your career, I made a bunch of lateral moves to keep us international. And I could have been reaching even more for the brass ring to keep advancing, but I would have come back to the United States prematurely. And I really wanted to continue to challenge and feel what it feels like to work in a different environment. And I think it has enabled, I then have become a student of culture and trying to understand country culture and company culture and sort of what that looks like. And that's been really helpful coming back then to the United States and to LL Bean. LL Bean has its own culture, very strongly built off of family, built off of Leon. And I came in, and I think it's enabled me being an effective leader in that I have studied this culture. I've studied the LL Bean culture, and I've looked at where do I need to assimilate, where do I need to understand it, and then where can I challenge it, where can I make it better, but not from an arrogant or an ethnocentric perspective, much more from a business process perspective. And I've gained that experience from being overseas.
What was the biggest challenge for you to go overseas, having come from the United States and, as you mentioned, not being exposed perhaps in some ways? What was the biggest challenge? Was it a language challenge, or was it something else that we might not even think of?
Yeah. I mean, you have all of the challenges you can imagine, and weirdly, like the mundane challenge is the worst. Like, how do you get your cable set up, and with your language skills and all? And because when you come into a work environment, you have all the structure of work. And, the people who brought me into Belgium, like they knew they were bringing an American into Belgium. So it was like, okay, I need some language skills and all that kind of stuff. Having my family feel at home where they don't, especially my wife, who, when you're on a work visa, your spouse can't work. And so for her to find her feet underneath her and know that I just get to go to work and go and be productive, from 8 to 6, but she's at home trying to figure out those things. So that definitely was a big challenge. And then strangely, the most difficult place for me from a work environment was actually working in the UK. And I found that to be incredibly challenging. That culture, I was in Northern England, very, very provincial culture, not very appreciative of Americans there. And it was really, really challenging. I left the UK with 0 friends outside of work. It was an incredibly intense work environment, and it was like 24/7. Whereas when we were in Europe and China, we were able to travel a lot. There was amazing expat communities that we could connect in with from all different cultures, and so.
Oh, that makes such a big difference.
Yeah.
What enticed you to actually apply for the position at LLB?
So I'll tell you the real story. This feels intimate. This may not. This may not be as intimate with the cameras and all, but it's deeply personal. And so my father was sick in April of 2014 and passed away in May of 2014. And I was able to be there with my dad. I was able to promise him I'd take care of my mom and my sister, and that everything was going to be okay. And he passed away. And at my dad's memorial service in June of 14, my best friends from college were there, two of whom are a couple that live in Maine, one of whom worked for L.L. Bean. And she came up to me at the, and we were living in England at the time. We had been away from Maine for 13 years, overseas for 8. And she handed me this piece of paper, folded up, and she said, "It's time for you to come home." And when I got back to my mom's house and I opened that letter, it was an internal memo from Chris McCormick, the previous CEO of L.L. Bean, announcing his future retirement in 2 years. And that's in Freeport, Maine. My sister's in Orono. My mom's in Amherst, Massachusetts. Freeport is equidistant from both of those. I had made this promise to my dad, and I was really intrigued. And I never thought I would be able to come back to Maine because I had gotten up to a level in the Walmart organization where I didn't know if there were going to be jobs that would be interesting and big enough in Maine. So I was intrigued. I did a bunch of research over 2014 on just trying to figure out like what was going to happen with L.L. Bean, and then in March of 15, a recruiter contacted me from London saying our San Francisco office contacted us and they're doing a search for a company called L.L. Bean. They didn't know who L.L. Bean was. Are you interested in that job?
Have you heard of them?
Yeah. And so I started the interview process in March of 2015. It went all the way through to September. And I never thought I would get the job. There were a number of really qualified, fantastic internal candidates. And they kept on calling me back. And I went through the external process, and I went through meeting all family members, all board members. And to the surprise of me and to my family, we didn't intend to move back to the United States ever. We were living in Shanghai at that point. We had just moved from England to Shanghai. And truth be told, my daughters were happy for me, but they were not happy for us, in that they knew that it was the perfect job for me and fit with my values and my outdoor orientation. But we really didn't intend to move back to the United States, and so we did, and here we are.
And really I recognize it hadn't been a family person at the CEO helm, but you moving into that where it is such a family business. How hard is that when you're interviewing to come into a situation that, I can't call it a small business, although I know there's some students in the audience for small business management, but how hard is that?
Yeah, it's challenging. You know, it's interesting. I worked for Walmart for 5 years, and strangely, Walmart's the world's largest corporation, but the Waltons own 50% of the stock, and you actually interact with, Rob Walton was the chairman of the board, and you actually interact with some of the Waltons at different times, and there's a weird family component to working for Walmart. And so when I came to Bean, I was familiar with family members who were sitting in the front row, of businesses, and but it's fascinating. It's family dynamics are complex, and the beautiful thing about the Bean, Clark, Gorman family is they love the brand, they love the business. They love the stakeholder philosophy, and our stakeholder philosophy comes from them, and that is for our employees, our customers, our shareholders, our suppliers, the environment, and our communities. We make sure that we never make a decision that benefits one to the detriment of another. And that is an active business-making criteria that we use, and that comes from the family. And it creates really interesting business decisions where they may not be perfectly logical, they may not be perfectly capitalistic, but they are the right thing to do for the long term, either for your employees or for your suppliers or for your environment or whatever. And so there's an amazing, it's a very comprehensive integration of sort of family values and orientation into the business.
So that obviously is a type of a challenge. And looking back, do you have, or maybe looking forward to, can you identify the greatest challenge you faced in your leadership history? Because you've certainly been at different points with different businesses.
Yeah. I mean, I have some sensational stories of
We'll
when
definitely take the dirt, so whatever you want to share.
I mean, the easy answer to that one is managing the business through COVID and through 2020 and 2021 for sure will forever be the most interesting leadership challenge.
Absolutely.
But like when I was at Walmart China and we ran the supercenter business, we had 450 supercenters. We at one point had a government raid of one of our stores, and we had 36 employees who were imprisoned for labeling pork incorrectly, and we had 2 that were held for 6 months with no contact, no charges, and our CEO of that particular business didn't cross the border from Hong Kong into Shenzhen because he was afraid of being arrested. And so we, as the senior leadership team, had to run the company through that particular crisis. So all kinds of I get lots of random little stories like that were fascinating.
That's awesome.
But no doubt, from a challenge perspective, making sure that we kept our employees safe, the business solvent and viable through 20 and 2021, for sure were the greatest challenges.
Do you have any regrets, or when you look back, do you wish you had done something different, like stayed in Shanghai perhaps instead of coming here? I
don't, and I actually, funny, when I talked to the students at lunch today, I really don't have any regrets, and I really try to live a life that I don't have regrets. I try to I mentioned releasing that pressure of you try to make the best decision you can in the moment that you're in with the information that you have. It was one of the most important lessons during COVID, which, we had to make so many decisions with imperfect and incomplete data, but we needed to make a decision to move forward and keep things safe. And so I don't dwell a lot on mistakes and things in the past. What I do always reflect on is what's the lesson? What's the lesson that I have learned? And I've always been that way of just taking events, situations, and saying, what can I learn from that? And then I metabolize the lesson, and that becomes part of my own evolution, my own reflection, my own intent to be a better person or a better leader. But I don't dwell on those moments, those things, because there's no value in that. The value's in the lesson, and the value's in, can I take that lesson and can I do better? Can I do different the next time? And then shame on me if I make the same mistake.
True, and it seems like you use that philosophy, because my understanding is you're very involved in the community as well. Is that something can you describe why you choose to be involved like you are and share any things that you're specifically doing? Yeah,
so a couple things. It goes back to one of your earlier questions. So I do a lot of informal coaching and consulting with other small family businesses.
Sure.
I do a lot of work with Thomas Mosier Furniture, and I love the Mosier family and Tom and his 3 sons, and I try to help, and I try to take my experiences from LL Bean to help them as they're thinking about their future.
Right.
If anybody Mad Gabs, which is the lip balm, and Gabrielle Melchionda, I went to high school with her, but it's a Maine-based business, and she's trying to figure out sort of her future and stuff. And so I love working with other smaller businesses. I've never had the courage to be entrepreneurial. I've never gone off and done my own thing. I've always worked for large organizations. So I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for folks who are doing it on their own. And so I try to help with them as much as I can. I'm really excited about the work I'm doing right now with the greater Portland business community around DEI and around racial equity. And we have rallied together all of the CEOs and leaders of the major businesses in the greater Portland area to try to figure out how do we create a more welcoming community for underrepresented groups. All of us want to hire more different people and give them an experience that is deeply inclusive. But we can't do that if we don't do it together, creating a community that is inclusive for folks that we're inviting into our communities. So working really closely with the Greater Portland Chamber of Commerce and a lot of other business leaders around that.
That's great.
And on and on and on. Lots of stuff in the outdoors. And
I was going to say, you must have to do something. Is there spare time? What do you do if there is?
There is spare time.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
So I'm really good about energy management. I think about that a lot, and I can, my job takes a lot of energy, and I think a lot about how do I recharge my energy and how do I stay, and that is work-life balance, that is outdoor activities. I'm a road cyclist, mountain bike, I stand-up paddleboard, kayak, hunt, fish, and I make sure that I have time to do those things. Those are really reflective moments, and the purpose of L.A.Bean, the written purpose, and that Sean really helped us re-articulate in 2019, is to inspire and enable people to experience the restorative power of being outside. And that restorative power is really, really important and really deep on getting outside and finding places to recharge. And I try to do that.
That's the internal battery, not your cell phone battery. And
Correct.
That's very
that is
important.
the internal battery, for sure.
And I just think about that you're in an environment where you look around and you have lots of opportunities. Are there places in Maine that you choose to go when you are recharging?
Yeah, so I live in Yarmouth, so and out my back door I have the West Side Trail, which is fantastic for dog walking and mountain biking. So I do that. I love going up to Katahdin Woods and Waters, which is the new national monument. Lucas St. Clair, who is really one of the founders there, is a really good friend. And I would encourage everybody to get there. It is a future national park. So if you think about the esteem that we hold our national parks, like Acadia, to that the fact that Katahdin Woods and Waters could be at that level 50 years from now, to go there now and drive around on the dirt roads and to fish and to swim in the swimming holes and to just look at the views of Katahdin, absolutely spectacular. So
yes,
I love it there.
Freedom in our backyard, for sure. Is there something that you say to your family, to your daughters, to anyone else that you are most proud of in your career?
I mean, I'm proud of my family. They came along for the ride on a couple trips around the world, and my daughters they're resilient, they're kind, they're worldly, they're humble, and I'm really proud of sort of the people that they have become.
Wonderful. Well, with that, I know there's a lot more questions that could be asked, and so I'm going to break up our face-to-face and turn to the audience. And we do have a roving mic to ask some questions right here. So if you do have a question, if you don't mind putting your hand up, and we'll take the first person to be brave enough to ask. This is like in class, folks. So, right down here, as one of my former students, I can see that.
Thank you. Is it on? Hello.
That was on, yeah.
So you were talking about when you became the CEO of LL, being the change and the culture of change, and that dichotomy that we experience sometimes of internal candidates that you said that you were up against, and took over, beat out in a friendly, competitive way. They were still there, right? And then you were leading the company into a new era of change. Can you talk about, some of the challenges or how you intentionally changed in a way that didn't feel like change? How did you approach that?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. One of the mantras that we ended up landing on was change done with versus change done to. And that's really, really powerful. And how that manifested itself was, let me back up too. My leadership values that I lead with really overtly talk about, they are written on my whiteboard in my office, are transparency, empathy, and integrity. And transparency is give people as much information as you possibly can so that they always understand why a decision was made, the state of the business, whatever needs to be done. They may not agree, but they have all the facts and they understand. So that transparency then led, when we went into the change agenda, being really clear about the state of the business, where we were on a return on sales versus all of our competitors, why our financial results were so materially different than our competitors, and how we talk about our stakeholder philosophy and the 6 stakeholders. If we don't have a really strong enterprise in the middle that is generating a fair return, we can't support any of those stakeholders. So we talked about that really overtly and shared the state of the business and what we wanted and why we needed to change. And that led us into changing our return policy and our shipping policy, and we froze and terminated our pension, and we did a couple of voluntary retirements and some downsizing through all of that. But we shared it all. And so it was done with, not done to. And some of the most rewarding moments as a leader were people coming up saying, I know I might lose my job, but I understand that it will be good for LL Bean and that will be good for the state of Maine. Those are comments that were actually made multiple times by people. And so that's when people understand that you're part of something greater than just the business, especially for LL Bean. Like LL Bean is really important to the state of Maine. It's really important for LL Bean to be healthy, to support all of those stakeholders. So communicating really transparently and bringing people along and giving people the space to process the information, ask questions. When I talked about town halls, the difference of a town hall and I don't know what the opposite of a town hall meeting is, but a town hall meeting, we would set them up where we would have a set agenda for 45 to 60 minutes. The remaining 60 minutes, open Q&A. And executive team sitting exposed on stools intentionally in front of everybody. Nothing in front of us. There's no podium. There's no blocking. It's just people talking and creating that environment where people could ask questions. And they could be mad. They could be upset. They could not understand. And they could say, I don't like that decision. Can you tell me more? And I think engaging directly is far better than just letting things fester and people making up their own stories of why they think things happened. So, is that
Absolutely.
helpful? Okay.
Absolutely. Other questions in the audience? Oh, right over here, all the way over. You're going to get your exercise, Steve. Thank you.
Great to have you here, Steve.
Thanks.
One of the questions I have is, I'm a basketball coach here at the university, and I had the great privilege to have an outstanding mentor that set me up for success. I wonder if you could share, along the way, while your experience has been great, but I'm sure there's been mentors along the way that set your executive leadership style along with your own personality in place for your success.
Yeah, awesome. I've had a benefit of having just some absolutely incredible bosses. I've had two really bad ones. I won't name them, and I learned a lot from them. But I have, and I'll name a couple by name who have just been incredible mentors. I think I'm unique in that I actually have had a lot of incredibly powerful female bosses from a very early start. My first jobs at J. Walter Thompson, a woman by the name of Emily Swartzentruber was the leader of the media department, an incredibly powerful leader. And so my mentors, going into the Hannaford organization, and Hannaford is an absolute talent machine. On one of the pieces of advice that you asked me earlier on for graduates, anybody can go work for Hannaford, go do it, because they're incredible, their leadership development. But Ron Hodge was the CEO of Hannaford when I started, and his attention to leadership development was absolutely incredible. And then Shelley Broader was one of his direct reports, who then is my ultimate mentor. And every single move that I've ever made in my career, I have reviewed and reflected with Shelley. She was the head of strategy at Hannaford. She was my boss down in Florida. She left for the Walmart organization before I joined Walmart. That's why I joined Walmart several years later. We had the weird moment for a while where I reported to the CEO of our business in the UK. Shelley was the boss of him. So she was my best friend and my mentor, and she was my boss's boss, which is a little weird. But those mentors, absolutely incredible. And what I got from Shelley and another guy named Bill Burke, who actually runs the Sea Dogs, but he used to run the business that I worked in Portland. They always gave me assignments that I didn't think I could do. And I talked to the students earlier about one of the things I find really rewarding being a CEO is when you can see people, or you can create the conditions where people can achieve beyond what they thought their potential was. And I was the recipient of that many times. This woman named Nancy Hallberg in New York City, who also was at J. Walter Thompson, she asked me to work on projects that I didn't think I was qualified for. But those people saw something in me that they were willing to take a bet on me to go into that project. And I started to learn, okay, I may not have the confidence to do that yet, but if a person that I believe in has the confidence in me, then they must see something that I don't know yet. And I'm not sure that was an active thought in the moment, but it definitely became an active thought as my career progressed. And and I'm deeply appreciative of people seeing something in me and saying, I want you to work on this, and you'll figure it out. I want you to go to Belgium. You're going to be the only person working on this project, with English language, and I believe you can do that. And I have since internalized that and try to do the same thing for the folks that I can as well. And I go on and on. There's so many cool people that have really touched me and given me things that I deeply appreciate now.
You did say that you learned some things from the ones that you said were bad bosses. Is there
Yeah.
something in particular that you learned that you still apply today?
Yeah, I mean, I had one of my bosses who he set up a culture that it was overtly called gladiator school, and he set up a culture where, as an executive,
Watch out for the balls.
It's coming at
oh, it was
you.
brutal. It was so brutal. He set up a culture
Yikes.
where he expected everybody to come in with very strong positions from their perspective. So the merchant, what was their perspective, the operations person, the marketing person, I was the marketing person, or the customer voice. And we would come in with almost intractable positions on whatever we thought we would do. And he had learned from a previous leader who was very strong. He would set up, and you come in with incredible data and intelligence, hear everything. The previous boss would then say, okay, I've heard enough. We're going to go this direction. Everybody fall in line. The boss who had learned from that, he didn't have that final step of decisiveness. So we would come in all ready for battle. We would battle, and then he would say, okay, go work it out. We couldn't work it out. We were
Right.
so firm and strong. And there was actually a moment when one guy who ran operations literally said to the CEO, do you want us to go fight? Like, do you want us to leave the room and go fight? Like, we are so, and he didn't have the leadership chops to say, thank you, I appreciate all of these perspectives, I've heard enough, this is the direction we're going, and cut through that tension. He left that tension at all times in the room.
Gotcha.
And we ended up having incredibly dysfunctional relationships. And then it cascaded through our teams. Our teams could see that we were not aligned, so
Right.
then they would start battling, and it was a really, really toxic culture. And so, I've realized there are tons of places where, as CEO, I'm the only person who has heard all those different points of views,
Right.
and I now need to assimilate that, and I need to be really clear about the direction we're going to go and release that tension. And it was really excruciating being in that machine and having no place to release that tension.
Wow. Yeah, that silo effect that you just don't want to have, and it sounds like you're doing something different.
Trying to, for sure.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Other questions from the audience? Can you take another one? Oh, to the back here, Steve.
You mentioned about being excited about the future for our young folks here, your daughter's generation. I'm just wondering if you could expand upon it a little bit in terms of what do you see as maybe unique about this group, this generation, that you perhaps haven't seen before? I think it's easy to criticize cell phone use, TikTok, rabbit holes, poor attention spans or whatever, but what do you see as really unique about the 18 to 25, 28-year-old that makes you optimistic about our future as a nation or society?
Yeah. I think it comes down to one thing, and that is engagement. What I feel, I don't know if it's real or not, but the generation sort of 18 to 24, they're paying attention. They have opinions. They're really engaged on climate change, on population dynamics, on immigration, on what they believe is right and wrong. And maybe that's true every generation, and maybe I felt that same way when I was 18 to 24. I don't feel like I had that same level of engagement on, and it might be with technology, access to information, access to different points of view, the ability for this generation to share or see different perspectives really quickly through technology. It's the positive side of having technology at your fingertips. I just see a much deeper level of engagement. And this may be very personal just with my daughters, who definitely see right and wrong very clearly. And they care. and they're willing to say something about it. They're willing to do something about it. And so to me, that level of engagement feels different and feels powerful.
Great. Any others? Oh, go right ahead.
Earlier, you mentioned an analogy that you wanted to share, maybe related to leadership, and I was just wondering what that was.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
You have
1
3
minute?
minutes now.
3 minutes? 1 minute?
Sure.
Okay. So, and I'll give my quick story, but I will tell you, if you care about this story, I told this story for the Dickinson College commencement in 2018. So you can find that on YouTube,
Okay.
and you can hear a 14-minute version of it, which was my. But I have an analogy that I have carried with me all of my life since I was 25 years old, and it's strange because it circles back to L.L. Bean. Unbeknownst, I didn't realize that at the time, but. I have always pictured myself in my life hiking in the White Mountains with a backpack on my back, and it was always in my mind was a Native American wooden woven pack with narrow straps, and I've always just pictured myself figuratively walking through the woods, throwing all of my life experiences into that backpack, and consciously thinking about adding skills and experiences into that backpack. And early in my career, I would, figuratively, but I would do this. I would do an exercise where I would take the backpack off and I would empty out the contents in front of me. That meant sitting in front of a table with a piece of paper, and I would write down all the things that I had been doing, my transferable skills, my expert skills. I was a marketer, or I could communicate, or time management, or whatever it was. And I would look for the things that I didn't have. And early on, it was management experience, it was operational experience, it was merchandising, it was things like that. And I would think about skill building, and I would think about soft and hard skills I wanted to learn, and adding those into my backpack. And I would just continue to think about my life and all of my experiences in that backpack. And then having kids, I was throwing their experiences in there as well. And all of a sudden, when I'd empty my backpack out, I would see their experiences, and I would think, wow, those are bigger than my experiences. I want to keep doing those things for them. And then later in my career, when I was at the UK, I mentioned it was a challenging work environment there. I matured into a place where I took off my backpack. I literally sat at the table. I documented out all the things that were in there. But in that moment, I was looking for, where did I have joy? Where was I happy? Where was I the most productive in work? And then I looked at what was the answer and it was a particular job experience. And then I deconstructed what was it that gave me joy, that made me feel productive, that made me feel valued, made me feel good. And I broke it down into the component parts, and that's what I started to look for. I was like, I'm going to find another job, and I'm going to find a job with those component parts, because I need that joy back in my life. And that happened to be right before I started the LL Bean job, when that recruiter had contacted me. Come full circle, that story, I've been telling that story to myself since I was 25. I've been doing that exercise since I was 25. I come into LL Bean, lo and behold, there's the Allagash pack basket, which is the basket I have been thinking about all of my life, and we make it here in Maine. And so that's the story I was going to tell. And there's this whole bunch of stories that are moments where, like, when I looked at it, I was like, I'm just going to be a middle-aged white guy. And that's when I said I want to be diverse. And I told that story earlier, like that came out of my backpack work. So that's the analogy that I wanted to tell. Thanks for asking.
So, in our last, now we have 1 minute.
Okay, good. Yeah.
What's next for the backpack, so that we can see where Steve Smith is going?
Yeah, I mean, the past 2 years, it has been totally filled up with all of these new experiences. And one of the things we're talking a lot about, just as the organization, is what are the lessons that we are in right now that we need to metabolize for the future culture and the future business of LL Bean. And so I'm really thinking a lot about all the things that got thrown in, and what can stick to make us a better organization. And I mentioned the democratization of work with technology, and that's creating inclusion. And when everybody's equal square on a screen, and you can't tell title or stature, You can't tell
Or
someone's
pants.
in pants, exactly. You can't tell what they're wearing, if they're introverted, if they're extroverted. Everybody can participate. And so
Right.
there are so many interesting lessons that are happening right now that I'm intrigued on when we empty those out,
Yeah.
what will metabolize. It'll make us, a better society, better business, better leaders, better people. And
I love
happening right
that
now.
analogy, and I think we can all relate to the fact that we've taken a lot in, and it's probably time to look at it. So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful.
That's a great.
well, thank you so much, Steve. We really appreciate your time
Thanks for having
today. Really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's it.
Cool.
We will have another talk in January.